Hello, everyone. This is Ria Pahuja from ETCIO, and I welcome you all to this webinar, Embrace Cloud FinOps. If you've been struggling to innovate with cost awareness, well, you've landed at the right place. The cloud model has mainstreamed consumptive billing. However, the ensuing ease of provisioning and fulfillment has loosened cost control because the new model itself thrives on on-demand spending. In response, financial management paradigms are changing to bring cost sensitivity into the world, doing DevOps on the cloud. Earlier, good coders needed to only worry about maximizing algorithmic performance. But with cloud, a developer's choices also need to reflect OpEx optimization. This webinar shall discuss the culture shift where the line between engineers and finance manager has somehow blurred down. And for this very topical session, we have with us two eminent speakers from the industry. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sreekrishnan Venkatesh, CTO from Kyndryl India, and Mr. Subram Natarajan, Director of Customer Engineering from Google Cloud. A very warm welcome, dear speakers. How are you doing?
Good, all good.
Yeah, doing well. Hope you are doing the same.
All well, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here. Before we go ahead, I would just like to remind my attendees that they can keep dropping in their concerns, questions, and queries in the Q&A box. We will be addressing them over text at the same time. Over to you, Krishnan. Without any further ado, please take this forward.
Thank you, Ria, and hello, everyone. My name is Krishnan Venkateswaran. I'm the CTO of Kyndryl India. And like Ria said, with me today, I have Subram Natarajan, Director of Customer Engineering at Google India. Welcome again, Subram.
Thank you.
Subram and I will today discuss the case for cost-conscious DevOps and how the principles of cloud FinOps are enabling this. So at Kyndryl, we manage large hyperscaler environments for many customers worldwide. And we see the importance of building real-time cost awareness into solution development and deployment on clouds. And Google Cloud operates at planet scale. So no one at a better vantage point than Subram to join me to give us insights on this topic. So let me start by setting the context. As we all know, cloud computing has mainstreamed consumption-based billing of technology. The variable spend model, however, is nuanced and can be complex to master. Infrastructure purchase is no longer confined to the procurement department, and cost control levers no longer exclusively sit with the finance departments. And what has happened is that the ease of provisioning and fulfillment on the cloud has induced a softening of cost controls. Yeah, so finance management paradigms are changing. Cost sensitivity has been brought into the realm of software development and deployment on cloud. And in other words, DevOps is now cost aware. And so earlier, good coders needed to worry only about how efficient their algorithm's performance was. But with cloud, a developer or an SRE's choice also has to reflect the optimizing of the operating expenses, right? So the line between engineers and finance managers has blurred, and this is the context, right? So in this webinar, what we want to do is we want to lay out the cost complexity problem on cloud and also discuss ways of approaching it. So let me start with the twist of roles that we are seeing with clients worldwide. So the shift is that the developer, rather the SRE, is also becoming a finance manager, right? So in the world of cloud, DevOps engineers, they manage large systems through code. So compute, storage, and network resources are programmatically provisioned and deprovisioned on the go. This brings massive benefits such as software-defined operations and scalability. But these gains are based on the premise of DevOps engineers expanding their responsibilities to include the procurement, provisioning, and release of the underpinning infrastructure, the underpinning services, that too in real time. Right. So now, as we know, billing on the cloud accumulates every month, like utility bills, and it varies dynamically based on usage. And this calls for a tight coupling between the application deployment and cost control, right? So the cheapest on-demand instance on any of the three major hyperscalers is under $100 a year, but consider a buggy auto-scaling policy or a faulty deployment pipeline that can generate dozens or scores of redundant instances, and it can multiply costs by that same factor, right? And on the other hand, the most expensive compute on one of the hyperscalers, it costs upward of $1 million per VM per year, right? So leaving even a single such instance inadvertently turned on, that can perhaps force a small business into bankruptcy. Or taking another example, if a system administrator provisions an object storage container and leaves it unsecured with rights open to the public, it could see unsolicited uploads of literally petabytes of data that can erode or even destroy the entire IT budget, right? And this is the case for cost-conscious DevOps, right? So now let me get Subram in. So Subram, what this means is that a business might in fact be entrusting its entire corporate fiscal health to their SRE when they are assigning them technical deliverables. So what are you seeing with Google Cloud customers? So are you seeing large-scale FinOps adoption, and what are the motivations that you are encountering for customers to embrace cloud FinOps practices?
So Krishnan, firstly, thanks for inviting me into this discussion. It is indeed a pleasure to connect back with you and share some of the perspectives on this important topic. The short answer to your question is yes, absolutely. But I want to put things a little bit in context. We are all aware of the earlier two evolutions of the cloud. First, it was the VM cloud, where any infrastructure was spun off on cloud. And then there was this infrastructure cloud, which is kind of predominated with lift and shift of everything, compute, storage, networking. While these two moved the needle to a large extent on cloud adoption, and by the way, they were very important, the ROI of these early cloud migrations didn't deliver on compelling transformative or disruptive results as one would have hoped. And it hasn't fundamentally changed the way business leaders and employees work inside and outside of IT. One of the key reasons, as you rightly identified, Krishnan, is the challenge of financial operating model that remains, still stuck in some sort of, I would say, legacy processes, methodologies, and technologies. So therefore, it is natural for companies to start migrating to cloud and rely on financial processes and manage their data center environments. But they may find the traditional IT financial controls have limitations in the ability to manage, predict cloud spend effectively, and so on. At Google Cloud, we see our customers are recognizing these challenges or motivations. These are key motivators in my view, primarily around FinOps. And as they start ramping their workloads, they see 5 different areas or 5 different key drivers to move towards a FinOps model that is much more modernized. First is this around planning cycle. The annual planning cycle that are in place today, most of the organizations won't work effectively due to dynamic changes, as you rightly indicated, due to complex, let's say cloud migrations and consumption patterns and so on. For example, a business case might have been established to support cloud migration decision along with timing, ramping, and the actual migration plan may look very different. The application dependencies that are evaluated, the segregation of specific workloads, such as which ones you're going to rehost, refactor, replatform, the classic choices. Each of these have specific cost and time frame implication. For these reasons, it is not very uncommon rather, for companies to adopt a more dynamic planning process. Second, in a centralized setup, there is limited visibility to the usage, primarily around the source of cost overrun, because cost overrun is more or less everywhere that you see, right? Therefore, if you were to really have a unique capability built on public cloud to provision discrete resources, why not make use of it? And that is where the companies are developing the muscle or the ability to attribute cloud cost to their lines of business through chargeback mechanisms or even showback mechanisms. The third aspect is pivoting the spend control on OpEx model. And while this may look very simple, the traditional one-time purchase models are simply not suited for business needs today, especially in the cloud world. By the way, average is about 30% wasted spend due to poor alignment of spend controls. And therefore, one needs to focus on this as well. Fourth is the dimension of finance forecasting. In my view, this is very important, right? In a cloud environment, it has to be done carefully. It can't follow the traditional process of taking into account the asset values, depreciation, maintenance, cooling, DC floor space, labor costs. The list continues. These models based on the steady state consumption and to some degree growth also don't apply well in the cloud environment. And lastly, the financial planning for cloud environment must follow different resource investment patterns. So typically, if you look at large enterprises, we follow a traditional long-term investment cycle. And we end up with capacities that is substantially larger than what is being really deployed for use. So, given the dynamic nature of cloud infrastructure, companies are looking to Google Cloud to really see, tell them how to realize how the investment cycles can align better with the dynamism that the cloud itself represents. Cloud is all known about, pay, go. So these 5 challenges or drivers, in my view, are the key motivations for driving customers to think of better ways of achieving financial prudence, if you will.
Thank you, Subram. Penetrating observations and very intuitive. So you said, you pointed out the need for dynamic planning. Then you said, pivoting to an OpEx model is easier said than done, and to elicit efficiencies needs careful thinking and planning. And you also pointed out that migration can be heterogeneous and so on. So that brings us to a related topic, which is the variable spend model and the fact that it is indeterministic, and the fact that it can even be daunting sometimes. So in many large client deals where there is substantial hyperscaler footprint, we see cost convolution. And comprehending the cloud rate card can itself sometimes be an onerous task. So if you look at, for example, storage services on the cloud, you encounter complex billing rules with many variables in that equation. So it's no longer like the CapEx days. Here, the incurred charge is based on a chosen tier, which could be a function of frequency of IO access, the desired speed of retrieval, the required degree of replication, and all of that. And it may even depend on volumes, right? The first slab used during a month may cost less per gigabyte than the next, and so forth. And even in compute, right? So if you are developing, say, an India scale application with a peak concurrent user load in the, let's say, in the double-digit million simultaneous users, how do you model optimal compute costs given the various choices you have? So how do you estimate, for example, the number of nodes that need to make up a container cluster that run the microservices in question, because the rules of the game change when you scale up, right? So or how do you account for auto scaling policies into the cost model, because the load is going to fluctuate and you don't want to obviously pay for underutilized service? Or how do you take advantage of what are called committed user or reserved instances in the cost model, right? So you will always have the need for some always on instances, at least for things like database servers and other basic services. So why not take advantage of the markdowns that minimum commitment brings to that extent, right? Reserved instances can be provisioned on demand, but they cannot be deprovisioned on demand, not until the end of a committed time duration. But if high utilization can somehow be consistently maintained, then one typically sees a mid double-digit percentage cost advantage over the more traditional classic on-demand instances, right? And it is also possible that in many of our customers, some parts of their application, they can be designed to live with the uncertainties associated with preemptible compute, with spot compute. So for example, it could be some notifications generated from the cloud to a front end, right? And if you can factor that into your model, then you even see high double-digit percentage savings on top of the classical instances. Or there could be parts of an app that can thrive on cheap serverless compute. For example, some of the asynchronous code that executes in any given application. So in short, creating a cost model for a real world cloud native application can itself be pretty formidable. So and then some of these resources, such as compute and storage, they scale horizontally with users or horizontally with load, but there are certain other PaaS elements, for example, VPN gateways or other network elements that scale vertically rather than horizontally. So you choose your t-shirt size based on things like the bandwidth requirements or the uptime guarantees needed and so forth. And then you scale vertically up or down based on the load behavior, right? And then to make it all these things even more complex, there are also charges associated with monitoring or services like logging, security controls, and all of that. So the point finally is that with cloud, creating a cost model can be complex or is complex. And this itself is a motivation to understand and implement FinOps and the principles of FinOps and the practices that it brings, right? So Subram, I know that Google Cloud is one of the founding members of the FinOps Foundation. And so I want to request your experiential insights on, how do you see large customers tackle some of these, the complexities around modeling their cloud spend and so forth?
Yeah. Krishnan, I think on the subject of FinOps, this is the biggest elephant in the room, right? I mean, fairly, as you rightly said, there's a fair bit of complexity. But there is also method to this madness. See, at the end of the day, creation of an on-prem data center, finance forecast, and modeling is relatively straightforward, right? There is take the depreciation runoff of all the data center assets, add the new depreciation for capital spend in the period, and run rate of OPEX factors, maintenance, licensing, you name it. Pretty much that list is fairly finite, and these costs are typically stable, and customers often achieve 98% of forecast accuracy, cost model accuracy, using the model that they have. But forecasting in cloud expenses is an entirely different ballgame. It's common for businesses to start with the same trend or trend-based approach using their data center, and they quickly find the forecasting variances are upwards of 25%. So that level of variance can, as you rightly said, smaller companies can sink in that kind of a variance, right? So therefore, not only are companies moving to a more detailed forecasting models, which employ a combination of trend-based forecasting plus stable environment, plus the driver-based forecasting for a demand-driven consumption. The other interesting phenomenon here is they are also beginning to include application teams responsible for cloud consumption in the forecasting and variance analysis process. This is a big shift. As far as the standardized model is concerned, there is no one size fits all, as you rightly said. There are multiple t-shirt sizes. I think what it helps is the way that we look at Google Cloud when we look at these kind of financial model creation is to kind of build on top of the technology business management as a framework. If you think of it as a layered cake, you have the finance view at the bottom layer, which provides a standard set of cost pools, hardware, software, labor, facilities like that. And then comes the IT view in the middle, which includes a standard set of IT towers, compute, storage, networking, databases, and so on. And at the apex is where you have the business view, which comprises of generic set of technical solutions. And they bring in the customer angle to it, partner angle to it, and so on. So therefore, what we need to do is to take this cost model and then start applying the cost allocations based on consumption, attribution, and assumption. I think everybody knows that the first two, the consumption and attribution, relates to or represent the direct or shared costs. Then the actual mechanism of splitting can happen either proportionally or even split or fixed split based on the policies that we have defined. Mind you, this is just a guidance to the modeling method that we follow at Google Cloud as part of establishing the overall FinOps framework. But depending on the situation, model parameters, we apply different weightage proportions, to different factors. But Krishnan, I was thinking about it, and there is another level where establishing a proper cloud FinOps could make a big difference, could benefit a great deal. Because while we talk about forecast modeling for resource consumption, there is a cultural shift that is needed as well. And at Google Cloud, we have been advocating the Cloud FinOps, which is an operational framework, and associated with that is a cultural shift that brings technology, finance, and businesses together to create what I call as a organizational transparency. And I think it also brings in a notion of shared responsibility to manage cloud costs. It requires personal mindset change, cultural change, where financial accountability has to be shifted to the edge, and becomes everyone's responsibility to ensure that cloud services are consumed in the most cost-effective manner and drive substantial business outcomes that is much more meaningful and sustainable. So you see, I think the cost model, while you can start building on the levels, multiple levels of what we need to attribute to how we build the variability versus stability, there is a surrounding set of transformation that is required to make sure FinOps successful.
Profound views, Subram. Can't agree with you more. You talked about the variance, right? When you move to cloud from a capex model, you pointed out that the difference between what is planned and what's expected can be in mid double digits. You said 25% and so on, right? And so with cloud, you get this infrastructure as code. You get the power and flexibility of not just infrastructure as code, but nowadays we talk about observability as code and policy as code and on all of that. But the trade-off is, like you said, the difficulty to model and the need for some of the FinOps practices. Then you also pointed out the cultural aspect, right? Again, agree with you 100%. So with DevOps, just like operations, shifted left, now with FinOps, even the finance management is shifting left towards the DevOps and the SRE engineer. So that absolutely calls for an organizational awareness and in turn a cultural shift, right? So excellent points there. So now let's turn to the big question, which is how can we ride on FinOps principles to innovate with cost awareness? So to obtain the expected return on investment with cloud, and Subram, you pointed that out a couple of times, it is key to build guardrails so that innovation is also cost aware, right? And many clouds, all three hyperscalers, they natively offer sophisticated tools that can monitor spend against set budgets. They can generate things like billing alarms when a threshold is breached. Some hyperscalers, they also offer virtual advisors that can analyze your cloud deployment and then decipher spending patterns with AI models and such, and they could recommend actions to optimize cost. Some vendors, they specialize in visualization, cost visualization tools, heat maps, and all of that, and that can offer past spend observability as well as help in predicting future charges, right? And recently I was going through the example of a managed NAT gateway on one of the hyperscalers. It costs about 4 cents or 4.5 cents per gigabyte, but when you actually end up putting a petabyte of data through that every month, it adds up to an astounding $500,000, right, per year. And the thing is, if you have the right level of observability, if you have the right level of tools, and you know what's going on, you may be able to solution that same deployment with an alternate data flow path that does not need that particular NAT gateway, which was the fact in the particular case that I was referring to. So these importance of these cost exploration tools to detect anomalies in spend trends is pretty immense, because these tools can really do wonders. Sometimes they can recommend how to resize cloud environments, or rather right size cloud environments based on the observed compute utilization, memory utilizations, and so on. Or they can, for example, determine underutilized servers and suggest new tiers that is most suited to their usage. They could generate recommendations on moving certain on-demand instances to more of a reserved or committed use type instances. They may recommend that you automatically stop certain development test servers during periods of lean usage, like weekends, and automatically restart them. All of that brutal extreme automation can conform to some of the FinOps principles. So this cost conscious DevOps that is reactive to the information and the advice that such tools generate, that's perhaps key. So coming back to you, Subram, what do you see in the field, especially with large customers, where the cloud run rate runs in the millions of dollars, and Google has tons of those kind of customers, because you operate in planet scale. So how do they innovatively use FinOps practices to optimize their cloud leverage?
Again, an excellent question, Krishnan, and I fully appreciate and agree with you on some of the aspects of manageability, that the observability that you're talking about, right? What you can't measure, you cannot manage. While it may seem like as simple as the statement is, but the impact of this is very profound. And in many ways, this is the heart of the FinOps. If you take what FinOps does, while we talk about the cultural shift and the real purpose behind why a FinOps setup is done, is primarily to make sure everybody becomes aware and therefore has their skin in the game in bettering the overall financial prudence of the organization. At Google, I can talk about like 2-3 things that more of best practices, or as you start thinking about getting into a full-fledged FinOps, what are the stuff that you need to keep in mind, right? So I would say 3 practices at the organizational level would really help with the success of FinOps. So first is, FinOps should become the resource for the organization. So, and the reason I'm saying that is, once you establish, the mission should be to partner with the management and finance and the technical teams, managing the cloud spend, public cloud spend, minimizing the wastage, implementing some of the business value metrics. So this is one of the core mission statement. Now, it is critical to avoid a negative perception also, right? That FinOps team is always wishing to create policies. They are the sole policy makers and enforcement body. That is not the intent at all, right? In fact, I would say they are rarely empowered to overturn the decisions of technical teams. And therefore, it is important for all of us to avoid creating that impression in the organization. They should be positioned as a more collaborative players in the organization, and to help things like what you mentioned, enhanced reporting of cloud costs. What is the cloud spend? Improving the forecast and accuracy, creating an awareness of perhaps the architectural options that can save money, maybe a real-time visibility to potential saving opportunities. And then maybe, they can also think of bringing in a governance framework around this, right? So this is very important. The second tip or best practice that we follow is aligning cloud FinOps with the rest of the organization. It's not a separate organization that stands in silo, because we see a variety of alignments that happen between the FinOps team and the rest of the organization. Initially, FinOps teams often form without the organization taking any deliberate action at all. Now, usually they form a small group of finance and technical professionals, and typically they are charged with, or they are asked to generate reports on cloud spend. That's how it begins. And without becoming aware at that time that these individuals are often the first FinOps practitioners in the organization. So once the need for that formal FinOps team is identified, there are, you can start really working on common organizational structure options. Companies are, we are seeing a lot of companies using or implementing official teams around FinOps, even to the extent of introducing cross-functional program teams, or making FinOps as an extension to Cloud Center of Excellence. In some cases I have seen customers have amplified it fully by establishing a centralized cloud FinOps. So that alignment is essential. The third is, I was talking about it earlier, about the cloud cultural change. See, at the end of the day, cloud FinOps can spread the culture of accountability beyond the management to the operators and architects of the infrastructure by providing the visibility, spend, opportunities, and so on. This is an important function to know, to become aware how to reduce waste. If you look at successful organizations where they have done some good financial management, they employ even creative models or various incentive models to drive the behavior, to change the mindset and culture across the enterprise. In fact, I know of organizations which gamify this and to not only drive the message of culture, but also drive the cost awareness at the edge levels. I'm talking about developers, SRE, just like what you mentioned. It is getting decentralized completely so that it becomes part of the DNA. At the same time, senior management should play an active part in driving the change. And they should consistently drive and articulate their narrative around this cost control. They act as role models, living and breathing the values and around the FinOps and so on. So it is like an all-around model. I've seen the most effective way to drive a cost-conscious culture change across the organization from a top-down perspective. Or two things are very, very effective. One is embed cost-driven management by objectives. The MBOs, make it part of their MBOs, or even objectives and key results. Make it part of their key results so that it becomes ingrained in their whole management process. So you see, cloud FinOps should not be viewed in isolation. Instead, they should be a resource for the organization. It should be aligned with the rest of the organizations as part of, and they should, above all, play an active role in driving the cultural change across the organization.
Thanks, Subram. Very powerful insights. Very, very interesting the way you articulate it as well. So, so let me conclude. So in the new world of cloud, cost is a first order problem, as we discussed. To advantageously digitize business models using the power of cloud and AI, cost awareness in real time has to be built into the technical solutioning and deployment. And we see this with every large customer in every industry that has led digitization, touch, and influence the core of their business. Success here thus calls for adopting FinOps, which is a combination of new DevSecOps practices and a culture shift. Subram very eloquently reiterated both of this. For the DevSecOps practices, you even very interestingly pointed out that there could even be an architectural element to it, right? Architectural alignment and patterns that could help innovate some of the cost-aware DevSecOps practices, and from a cultural aspect as well. Subram, you mentioned even the gaming and certain other possibilities and how important that is as well. So so we come to the end of this webinar. Thanks again, Subram, for this enlightening conversation, and thanks to the audience for the opportunity to speak. And here is to cost-conscious innovation on cloud. So thank you, and over to you, Ria.
Thank you, Krishnan. Thank you, Subram and Krishnan, for that insightful conversation. I'm sure it must have been so helpful for all the attendees who have joined us today. Dear attendees, Kyndryl team has been generous enough to keep answering your questions in the chat box and Q&A box. In case you have any more queries or questions, please do reach out to us through any of our online or digital communication channels. We will always be happy to help, always there to answer your questions. Once again, thank you so much for joining us in the session today. Until next time, please stay safe and stay connected.
Thank you.
Thank you.